Hello, hello.
How's your week been?
Interesting, to say the least.
Indeed. Definitely an interesting week.
A lot of people with a lot of opinions.
Yeah, this will be an interesting one today. I definitely want to hear you guys' thoughts on everything that's been going on this week. I know a lot of people want to talk about privacy today, and that's the hot topic of the week. So I think that's kind of what we're gonna be getting into today a little bit, just with a couple updates too. But
Yeah, let's start with the boring stuff like the actual THORChain protocol.
Wow, what a bore.
195 is the next version that's going out to maybe, I guess, Monday. It'll go out at this point. Is going to be like the biggest THORChain software update ever. So that's cool.
195? What's
Yeah.
so interesting about 195? I don't see anything that's crazy on 195. Is it
Oh,
POL?
yeah. No, yeah. Just protocol and liquidity and AVAX. Yeah, nothing too big.
Sounds pretty minimal. So that's laying the groundwork for order books, for single-sided LP.
Exactly, yeah.
Nice.
So POL is a good one. Glad we got that landed. Great effort by Chad on that one. And then, of course, Eridanis with the Avalanche chain client worked probably like for 2 months on that. That was definitely a beast. I'll let him come up and talk a little bit more about that. And then we're going to talk about a new security program as well that we're spinning up, which we're all very excited about, to help augment the efforts of THORsec and our Immune5 bug bounty program. Yeah, a lot of good stuff for today.
Awesome. Well, there's Eridanis.
You want to invite him?
Yeah, he's connecting.
Yo, how's it going, guys? You hear me?
Hey, what's up?
What's going on? Yeah, V95, it's a big one. Super excited to get AVAX in there. First EVM, kind of ETH fork, or basically ETH copy that we're pulling in there. I had to do some kind of custom logic for that, but that should make the next ones easier. And as part of that, like we're actually we're going through audits right now. So we did a smart contract audit through Hacken, which is wrapped up, and we're actually moving forward with a different kind of audit for the ETH and the AVAX chain client. So would love to get Trebian up here, and he's going to kind of walk us through Code Arena, which is kind of this audit contest shop that's a really exciting kind of addition to THORChain's security space. So would love to get him up there and start talking about it. If one of you guys could get him up here.
Yeah, I just invited him. If he accepts, or you can just request, and we'll let him up. So
Sweet.
yeah, while we're waiting for that, let's hear a little bit about the AVAX client. So that's going live in 195. So what does that mean for the rollout of Avalanche on THORChain?
Yeah, so it's still so basically it's merged and going out in 95, but won't be activated. So the node vote has passed, initial audits have passed, THORsec review obviously has passed, but we're going to be waiting for this next audit contest that we're doing, and then and changes that are necessary will go into 96 or 97. And at that point we can roll out to mainnet. So probably still a few weeks out. But that will give us time to do the proper, audits and make sure everything is completely functional and do it right. So that's kind of the basic plan.
Sounds great. Yeah, I'd love to kind of, it seems like every new big update, there's like more layers of legitimacy being added and like more checks and more just all of that. So yeah, that sounds really good.
Absolutely. And we're working with some teams in the Avalanche space that will be integrating with the connection. So that will also give those teams times to kind of get their ducks in a row and make sure this launch will be impactful for both the Avalanche community and the THORChain community. And it's going to be really, really exciting.
Yeah, Pluto and Eridanis have been getting really good at integrating new chains into THORChain. Obviously, it's been a process with Terra, and then Adam. Now Eridanis has been working on AVAX, but they're getting pretty good at adding new chains onto THORChain. So that just adds to the the skill repertoire of 9 realms, and makes it easier to add new chains in the future now that we have more experience doing that.
What are you guys looking at most closely after Avalanche? Maybe no promises yet, but just curious, like what you feel is priority.
Yeah. So basically, like kind of how I'm thinking about this, and what's crazy is that we're getting the most like inbound interest from chains that are looking to connect to THORChain, which is really exciting because I think people, protocol teams are really seeing the benefit of integrating with THORChain, which is incredible. And so what I would love to see is kind of shifting the mentality from, Nine Realms and the core team building out these chain clients to those external protocol teams working on the connection. And we're seeing that obviously with Haven and Dash. So we're getting inbound interest from some really cool protocols. One of them is Moonbeam, which is kind of the EVM fork on Polkadot, which could be kind of the entry point into the Polkadot ecosystem for THORChain. And hopefully what we'll see is that these core teams, obviously with the guidance of core developers, work on the chain client. And what that will allow is like the core team and Nine Realms to focus more heavily on the protocol itself and security, and constantly pushing the game forward there and pushing forward integration and DEX and wallet integrations, because as I've said before, like what THORChain already does is incredible, and we just need to kind of squeeze every drop we can out of what we already provide, which is an incredible service to the entire ecosystem. So our goal can then shift more into driving more volume through THORChain, increasing yield and increasing liquidity, and having those external teams kind of take the path forward on chain integrations.
Yeah, one thing I'll also add to that is that we're going to try something new for next chain, like rather than sort of like the core team and Nine Realms like taking the temperature of the community and then deciding on basically like this is the next chain we're going to pursue, and then putting that to a vote for the node operators. We're going to actually have the node operators signal what they would like the next chain to be. So like instead of just saying like, oh, it's time to vote on, AVAX, or it's time to vote on whatever, we'll just throw up a list of, five or six potential candidates for the next chain. And then the nodes will basically vote on which one they want to be the next chain. So it's no longer going to be like a binary, should we add this chain? It's more of like which chain should we add? So it's a bit of a change in the process, but that was Chad B's suggestion, which I thought was a good one.
That's a great idea. Love that. Yeah, it kind of flips the whole thing around. Like rather than build the thing, then see if people want it or nodes want it this way, it's like the nodes kind of get to steer a bit more and signal like what should be worked on, what's most priority moving forward. So that sounds really cool. I like that.
Yeah. And then of course the thing I'll always caveat is that, the more chains that you add onto THORChain, the more technical and infrastructure risk. And also the more reliant we become on centralized providers, which has obviously been a bit of a concern. But like with Terra, for example, you couldn't run like a Terra node on even certain bare metal cloud providers, much less like if you wanted to like run a node on your computer at home, like forget it. So, there's going to be, we have to have a really frank discussion about, at what point, like, we basically can't keep adding chains forever. We can't add every single chain in the universe to THORChain. It won't work. So there's a constant trade-off there between like decentralization and performance and number of chains. And so really the way we're looking at it is like how much value or how much market cap in the overall ecosystem can we capture? And are there diminishing marginal returns to adding new chains? And if so, is it worth doing so if you're not going to be capturing extra TVL or extra volume as a result? So I would hope that we just like, think about it not just like what is the next chain, and more like do we need, like what chain can we absolutely not live without on THORChain?
To be clear, like it's not that it would not work. You could literally add every like layer 1 chain and layer 2 chain to THORChain, and it would still work. It'd be expensive because all the nodes have to run all this infrastructure, and it would probably cost more money to run that infrastructure than it would then you would benefit from like node rewards, right? But from a technical perspective, it's totally possible. The question becomes, as Pluto was just alluding to, like, well, what are the ones we as a community really want to see added? And every one of these chains is kind of an in-depth knowledge or like debate about the value prop and what it offers us, right? So adding a chain like Monero, for example, is different, right? Because it's a privacy chain, so it's offering something to the entire network, something that doesn't have today, which is access to a privacy chain, versus something adding, another Cosmo chain that's more or less the same as other ones that we've seen. So it's like that's kind of part of the debate that the community should have.
I don't want to interrupt, but I know that Trebian has a hard stop at 12:30 or a little bit before. So just want to get a chance to talk with Trebian and talk about THOReau.
Hi everyone, how's it going? Thanks for inviting me. So yeah, I had some technical issues, so I'm happy to be a part of this call. I can just dive right into it. So I've been having calls with the team, and essentially THOReau, we run decentralized audit competition. And you can think of it as a hybrid between traditional audit and bug bounty programs. And the model kind of addresses some of the pain points within those two models by better aligning incentives across all participants. So as probably many of you already know, with traditional audits, especially if you want to get it from a good firm, there is still a pretty long waiting time. And when you do get audited, it's usually by a small team, anywhere from 1 to 5 people. And the auditors, by and large, are kind of anonymous. So they don't really have skin in the game. So you might hear of a protocol getting hacked and you will hear of the firm that audited them, but rarely do you hear about the auditors who actually perform the audit. So C4 tries to address some of these issues by having very quick turnaround time, and we can basically run contests under a week, within 72 hours, if possible, if needed. And the reason we can do this is because it's community driven. So we don't hire any auditors. We've just grown a community of auditors who just show up to compete in this contest. As a result, we are seeing very high coverage. So I think over the past 20 contests, for EVM related contests, we are seeing somewhere between 45 to 60 plus wardens competing per contest, which is, quite a lot more compared to traditional audits. And then basically one of the reasons this has worked so far is there is a reputational aspect. We kind of gamify a little bit. So the wardens themselves, there's a leaderboard and they're competing with this. And we know for sure, neither do we stop them. So the auditors are actively leveraging their reputation within C4 to land independent gigs and do other things within the space. And the differences between C4 and the bug bounties such as Immunify, not that they are bad or anything, I think we occupy different spaces, is that with a bug bounty like Immunify, it's pretty open, so there's no guarantee that someone comes and try and crack the code. It's also a bit of a dark forest in the sense that if I'm faster than you, you might have put in a lot of effort, but I will get paid and you won't get paid. So the way we try to address problems is that the contests are bound with C4. They typically go anywhere from 3 days to 2 weeks. And as long as let's say 2 of us find the same bug while the contest is live, we will both get a split of that part of the award pool between us. So in a sense, it's guaranteed paid out, of course, only if you find something. And the way the reward works is that people are incentivized to find high severity bugs, which pays 10 times more than a medium. So even if someone comes in and submit a bunch of low grade bugs, they won't get paid anything. I should also mention the last point is that it's public. So every report is published publicly. There's a pretty active and vibrant community. So there's a tighter feedback loop as well in terms of understanding what other wardens have found and what has been missed. So there's a nice feedback learning loop over there. Yeah, so in a nutshell, that's a pretty high level overview of what THOReau does.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, so we heard about THOReau from our friends at Shake. And, they had, glowing reviews of the audit contest. I mean, they said that they ran an audit with, I will not name the audit shop, but they ran an audit, paid them $50,000. They found no critical or medium vulnerabilities. And then they ran, the same code through a C4 contest. And there was 300 submissions with at least 15 significant things to change. And so it's just like a crazy difference between the two. I'd love to hear why you think there is such a difference. Like what gives the audit contest such an edge over a traditional audit in kind of that context?
Right, sure. So I think skin in the game, for me, one of the reasons that actually drew me to working with C4 is just that I felt like they have a model that just better align incentives. So, for example, we speak to quite a lot of auditors, top auditors, and I mean, I'm not going to name names, but many of them have said that if they find 1 to 2 bugs, like medium or high, then they know they would have done their job right. So because essentially they're employed full time, and then they're often working with multiple projects and also things on the side. So with C4, it's the incentive is a bit. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So yeah, with C4, the coverage comes quite a lot into play. So because it's more open and people are actively, some people are making a living off this. So it's not in their favor to just look for one medium bug. So when they try to crack the code, they are trying to find the highest severity ones and to find as many of them as possible in order to get the lion's share of the award pool. So because of that, plus the coverage topic, which is just when you have 30, 40, 50 people showing up to try and crack the code, it's just from very different point of views to try and attack the code. So they're not so much of going through a process like traditional audit firms might. Since they're companies, they have to follow some kind of due process. With C4, someone might just come in and look at a very specific part of the contract and they just try to crack that. And if they do, then they get paid. So I think that's a reason why the model works so well.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And another thing that you mentioned is like you guys have seen, up to 75 people participate in an audit. And they're, if you think about 75 people and they each spend maybe 4 or 5 or maybe even more hours on looking at the code base. I mean, like that's an incredible amount of man hours of people like scouring your code base that you're just not going to get from a traditional audit, and you're probably not going to get from like internal code review either. And so that's just a really powerful way to like leverage the amount of people that are kind of participating in these things.
Yeah, exactly. So on average, if you discount the wardens, which is what we call auditors, who spend less than 4 hours per contest. So if you completely discount that segment, on average, a C4 contest would yield about 20 engineering weeks. So with traditional audits, you are basically paying per week auditors, right? Something like that. So a typical C4 contest would get you about 20 engineering weeks worth of hours.
Yeah, that's insane. So we are going to be doing a C4 contest for the AVAX chain client, the ETH chain client, and the router contracts. So we're super excited about that. We think this is going to help push forward the security of THORChain. Also, since THORChain is such a complicated code base, this will hopefully facilitate more of a white hat community around the code, allow people to get more familiar with it, and hopefully we can run several of these contests and facilitate more submissions. So if people want to participate as a warden, what's that process like? How do you sign up for that?
Yeah, so they can DM me directly, either on Telegram or Twitter. Is Travian XYZ, or they can also join our Discord. And basically, our admins can also get set up. So by default, we try to stay decentralized and open, so there is no KYC needed. There is a certified track for wardens who can KYC themselves to a third party. And basically, if you do that, you get access to some additional perks. But by and large, we try to stay as open and decentralized as possible. So anyone can begin tomorrow. And yeah, it's meritocratic. So if you find something, you will get paid out. No one's going to ask for your credentials and all that kind of stuff, right? Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I know you have to run pretty soon. Any other questions from other hosts right now, or any other closing thoughts from you, Trebian?
So when is it that this contest is going to start? Pretty soon, or is it going on already? Where can people get details?
Yeah, so pretty soon. We're kind of just wrapping up final details on the length of the contest and the scope of the contest. Hopefully, we'll use in the next few days. We'll give at least a week before the contest start. We'll announce at least a week before. That will allow wardens to get the right documentation. So I would say hopefully within 2 weeks, but that will all depend on finishing up the scoping.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. All right. Anything else, Trebian, or so we can close?
No. I think happy to talk more with anyone who's curious about being a warden. or if you have just general questions about how the contest might work, I'm happy to connect in DMs as well.
Thanks, man. Maybe we can get you on again once the contest is started, and then just to get some more eyes on it once the contest is live, so we can get some more eyes on the code there. Thanks for coming on.
That'd be amazing. Thanks for having me.
Yep. Thanks, man. Take care.
Yeah, thanks for the info. That's really cool.
Ciao.
Sweet. So bug bounty contest upcoming for the ETH and AVAX routers. So if anyone here is interested in that, definitely keep an eye out, especially on Code Arena and just here on THORChain, because definitely be announcing that and putting the bug bounty contest, because more eyes on the code is always a better thing. It's what everyone wants, is security on this network. So
yeah, absolutely. We'll blast it out and hopefully do some co-marketing with Code Arena to market the contest. So yeah, we're super excited. I would argue that THORChain has one of the most complex code bases. And so as many people as we can get to understand it and be poking at it, like the better for us protocol.
And that's a big reason to just not only do Immunify too. It just gets people that's in, like white hats that are in other communities. It gets them in looking at THORChain's code and actually like poking around and doing stuff, submitting bounties.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think there's a place for both, right? Like we've had great success with Immunify. We've had great success with internal audits. I mean, we do a few of these contests and maybe we get more Immunify submissions because more people are familiar with it and spend more time looking at it. So that's the goal.
Sweet, and thanks for organizing that. And hopefully that means after this contest ends, we could see AVAX live on THORChain. So thanks for all your help with that.
Absolutely.
Anything else we want to talk about with 195? Any POL stuff that anyone wants to talk about?
Yeah, why don't we talk about protocol and liquidity, just for anyone who's listening who hasn't been following. I think it's a pretty major development. Chad, if you're there, do you want to basically give a quick summary on that?
Yeah, sure. So protocol and liquidity, the concept I kind of associate to be the original concept came from Ohm, and the idea is that instead of having capital, like mercenary capital, where people are incentivized to add liquidity to the pools, you have the network itself, or the protocol itself, have its own liquidity that it adds to the pools, and then so that way it's like super diamond hands in a matter of speaking. So even in a bear market or whatever, the protocol still has a bunch of capital in the pools. We're not entirely doing that per se. That was the original idea behind Ohm, which is a good idea, but we're a little bit different than that. In our context, it's more about supporting Synths, right? So Synths has been around for a long time. We kind of had the design before we even launched multi-chain ChaosNet, but waited a good while before we actually enabled it on the network. And so Synths kind of give us an ability to do some things that's pretty powerful and pretty amazing. And the problem with Synths before is that we can only have so many Synths on the network before things get kind of increasingly risky, and might get a little bit too risky in my opinion. So we limited the amount of Synths on the network just to keep that risk in a very small kind of operating bounds. But with protocol and liquidity, the network can kind of become a counterparty to those Synths in some sense. And it makes it so that we can scale up the number of Synths on the network significantly more, right? And the more Synths in the network, the better, because it makes the pools deeper. Any Synths that are being minted means that an equal number of values being put into those pools to make those pools deeper. And so it opens the door to pretty significant advancements in this DEX, and one of which is the single-sided yield. So you can provide BTC, not sell half your BTC into Rune, and not take on Rune exposure, and just take on the asset you want to take on exposure and get a yield from that, which is that's a first in AMM history, if you ask me. I know Bancor claims it, but that design doesn't make any sense. And then the other thing is the order books too. So order books allowing people to kind of wait for execution time on their orders, and all that liquidity is just being stored as a synthetic, and that synthetic is also adding to the pools. And so you have increased trade volume from order books by allowing limit orders, and then you also have increased liquidity by all that capital being waiting to execute is just sitting there as making the pools even deeper. So this is the first step towards these kind of other two major features to kind of allow the network to expand in a much more interesting way. And both of those features will make the pools incredibly deep. I think it'll happen surprisingly quickly, that the pools will get very deep pretty fast. I probably shouldn't be making this claim, but yeah, it's the way it feels for me. That it's going to have significant effects on liquidity of the network, which is actually going to be spectacular. And then we're going to have to, deal with increased trade volumes and that kind of stuff as well coming downstream. But I think it's going to be a pretty significant thing. We're going to enable it on StateNet pretty after 159 goes out. And then we'll play with it, both the dev teams and as well as the community can start playing with it and validate that it works the way we think it works, that it's safe, all those kind of things. And then when we launch it on mainnet, we'll probably limit the amount of room that the network will put into the pools. It might be, I don't know what the number is. I'll just say 1 million just to throw out my number for now. But so that we can scale this thing slowly over time, just like we scaled the caps on the pools, and just kind of make sure the behavior is right and all that kind of stuff.
So when 1.95 comes out, is it basically like not enabled? It's just kind of in the background, or is there any like functionality coming right away?
No, it's feature flagged. So what that means is it's disabled by default. And so we can enable it on one chain like SafeNet and leave it disabled on another chain like mainnet. And then whenever we want to, as a community, we can go ahead and enable. Technically speaking, it's all controlled by Mimir. So if the node operators wanted to enable it on mainnet like day one, there's nothing actually stopping them from doing that. They could actually, in theory, do that, and it would work and it would go on. I wouldn't recommend that personally. I would advocate for the nodes to do that, but theoretically it's possible.
Well, I just wanted to highlight one of the things that that we were actually debating earlier this week when it comes to protocol owned liquidity is which chains should be eligible for protocol owned liquidity. There was some disagreement amongst the team about whether we should do it just for gas assets by default. So basically, like any L1 that's added on THORChain, BTC, ETH, Doge, AVAX, BNB, should all equally be eligible for protocol-owned liquidity. And myself and some others pushed back on that notion because, at the end of the day, protocol-owned liquidity is the protocol reserve taking a position in a token, right? It's selling Rune in order to buy up an asset, taking a position in that asset. And so node operators who are ultimately responsible for the protocol reserve and for the entire network, for that matter, should think very carefully about which L1s or which pools they want the protocol reserve to take a position in, because ultimately that is not a risk-free thing. It's an investment. It's possible that taking protocol-owned liquidity in the wrong tokens could prematurely exhaust the protocol reserve in a way that would both lead to fewer fewer block rewards for nodes, fewer block rewards for LPs. It would also eat further into the amount of the protocol reserve that it needs to be used to cover impermanent loss protection. So the protocol reserve is it's a finite thing. In an ideal scenario, the fees that the network are making are enough to essentially keep the protocol reserve balanced. So we're not ever really running out of deficit. But at the end of the day, this is all a balancing act, right? We want to lever as much as possible in order to bootstrap liquidity in the network, which is why protocol liquidity is a great thing. But we also have to be, realistic about the risks that, taking on protocol and liquidity faces us with. So there's going to be at some point we're going to have to vote. And at least, from my perspective, in my opinion, I think that the safest thing to do would be to just only start with BTC and ETH protocol owned liquidity. And sort of the reasoning behind that is that those are the pools that we ultimately think should be deepest, so that we can get the best execution price across any venue when we're doing things like DEX aggregation. So for example, as we're going out and doing these integrations, talking to teams like Trust Wallet, wallet teams, aggregators, they basically, when their user wants to go and make they want to go from BTC ETH to ETH in their wallet, they're going to look through all the different ways to do that, and we have to make sure that THORChain is competitive on that. And our hypothesis is that the BTC to ETH, and then via DEX aggregation from Uniswap or whatever to any of the ETH coins, is going to be like the most popular route by far. So like a big goal that we have is like to make sure that so that the protocol has that best execution price for Bitcoin and Ethereum specifically. And so we're working through some numbers right now. Like basically we have like a whole suite that has a matrix of BTC to Ethereum depths. And so basically being able to figure out like, how can we only have like 0.1 or 0.2% slippage on a $100,000 BTC to ETH trade? Well, it's going to require an additional like 40 million in BTC liquidity and 30 million in ETH liquidity or something like that. So, you know, we're just like, what we're trying to do right now is like quantitative analysis to figure out like what is the optimal like liquidity pool depths to achieve the outcomes that we personally believe are going to be like execution routes that will lead to increased volume through THORChain. So like protocol owned liquidity and single-sided LP are extremely important because they're going to allow us to deepen pools. Okay, well, what's the point of having a deep pool if you're not going to like be running volume through them, right? So it's like it's a balancing act. And so simultaneously, we have to figure out where is the best thing. Oh yeah, someone throw that matrix up in the Twitter thread. But yeah, simultaneously, we're having to figure out like where's the best place for like. And again, this is not like it's a free market, right? Like LPs should just put their tokens into like wherever they can get the best APRs. But at the same time, like we should also take a look at the network. We should take a look at where our efforts are going into integrating, and we should try to anticipate how will we be able to, you know, provide that best price execution. And so like, it's just our opinion that like BTC and ETH are the best use and the least risk for protocol on liquidity, at least in the beginning. Eventually, we could add things like BNB. I know stable coins, adding protocol on liquidity for stable coins would be a good idea because it would just make the network more efficient from an arbitrage perspective. But yeah, so like that, it's you know, it's an interesting question. I'm sure one which will be debated rigorously in the community over the coming weeks as we start to turn this thing on.
All right, there were quite a few things there that you know were a little inaccurate, but first of all, I think there seems to be people within the Nine Realms team who shares your perspective, but the OG team does not share your perspective on this, right? And that's okay. We can agree with you, and you can agree with us, and that's perfectly fine. The community can disagree with itself, like that's perfectly fine, right? But one of the things you said that would be, you know, categorically false is that this has the risk of exhausting the reserve. That is very much false. For one, the maximum amount of liquidity that the reserve could, in theory, add in total would be maybe 1/5 of what it actually has, or 1/6, or something like this. Like you cannot exhaust the reserve.
Chad, I did not say that it would fully exhaust the reserve. All I'm saying is that there's a pie. The protocol reserve is a pie, and that pie needs to be used to pay out block rewards. It needs to be used to cover impermanent loss protection, and it needs to be used to take a position in protocol on liquidity, right? So that's all I'm saying is that if you're taking on risk on the protocol on liquidity side, it's possible that you're changing the size of the pie. It's economic policy. And we have to be very, very straightforward about what we're doing when it comes to economic policy.
Okay. So the other thing is that the idea that the network was going to deploy, you know, even large amounts of Rune into, you know, a smaller pool, like take Litecoin, for example, or Doge, is also very incorrect. One, because those pools are very small, right? And they're not even going to have that much activity. And two, they're not generating a lot of swaps, which means there's not a lot of opportunity for yield, for a single-sided yield in that context, right? So even if we were to enable today, theoretically, if we were to enable the POL on all the pools in the entire network, not that I'm saying we should do that or I want to do that, but just theoretically speaking, the only ones that it actually would add to would be like BTC, ETH, and a couple stable coins, right? It would not actually add any capital to Doge or these other ones because there's not demand for them, right? So I don't have a kind of a mentality that just because POL is enabled on an asset that we're going to be dumping mass quantities of Rune into these pools. Like that's just not accurate to what would actually really be happening. Do you know what I mean? I think it's important that this network stays as neutral as it can and amoral as it can, and not get into a place where either Nine Realms or even the node operators are dictating which one of the assets are good assets and which one of the assets are bad assets. I think that's just not what we want to do. What you want to do is say that which one of the chains we want to support. And if the network goes through the process and says, we want to support AVAX or Dash or whatever it is, if the network determines we want to support those chains, then we should support them and not get into this like half support, half not support, like, and then get into more, DAO like governance arguments, things that become, we want to become, a governance minimalist perspective. That's what the whole thing was designed to be, governance minimalist. And whenever we can just be algorithmic or formulaic approaches to dealing with things, we should head that direction, because DAOs are fucking, oftentimes they're fucking terrible. We all know that. Very few percentage actually do even a remotely good job at accomplishing what they're trying to accomplish. So like my viewpoint is that by default, we should enable any gas asset, which is basically the primary asset per chain. But the feature is actually enabled in a way or designed in a way that the mirror can enable, disable, and pause on any one of these assets on any one of these chains, including gas assets or non-gas assets. So you can either enable it, so we added liquidity, withdraw liquidity. You can pause it, meaning we don't make any further actions. We just leave our state as it is now, whatever that is. Or you can disable, which means we're going to slowly kind of bleed ourselves out of that pool into some things. And each individual pool can be kind of determined by node operators if we need to do. But this argument that we're kind of having, or this debate we're kind of having, is only about the default position, not about what is the end result, but what is the default position.
Yeah, I just think you bring up good points. I just think that at the end of the day, like having more optionality is better, especially when you're, it comes to like a new and experimental feature like protocol owned liquidity. I don't think I have to tell you what would have happened if the protocol reserve had a large position in Luna, for example. So it's just like it's just one of those things where having like more controls in this case is better. But I do take your point about like it should be, ambivalent and not have like minimal governance is good. DAOs suck. Maybe in the future, like that would just be my question, like for the community or for node operators, is like, is this something that, people feel strongly about, like influencing node operators to, take different decisions and almost taking on like an active management stance to the protocol reserve? Or should we just, implement something algorithmic, maybe even say like the pool has to have a minimum, or has to generate like a minimum of this, amount of fees over a 90-day period to be eligible for protocol on liquidity, or just make it a free for all essentially and say like any L1. But I still do disagree with the idea that like we have to if we're going to make a decision about adding a chain to THORChain, that it should be eligible for like all of these sort of benefits of THORChain. I would even go as far to say that like, newer chains, newer L1s that are potentially more volatile and less established shouldn't even be eligible for impermanent loss protection, because it's a riskier asset to begin with. Why put that risk on the protocol reserve when THORChain is meant to be, it's meant to be a venue that is, allow, why would we risk its ability to like do its job as like the premier trading venue for Bitcoin to ETH L1 swaps, and then like some other like shitcoin goes to zero, and then like the rest of the rest of the protocol suffers as a result. So I actually do think at some point like we should consider separating the distinction between like a chain being technically added to THORChain and like, we're observing transactions and we're facilitating swaps. Like that's a very different thing than saying like subsidizing liquidity in here, or we're subsidizing liquidity providers in these pools. I think those are like, I don't think all chains are created equally. I would rather see, the protocol owned liquidity and the ILP and all of that, like I would rather that be rock solid and given to all the most important tokens that drive the most volume to THORChain, and all the other tokens can whatever. I mean, like once they're more established, they can vie or compete or lobby node operators to give them these privileges. But I just think that like it's like having that optionality is better in my opinion.
To be fair on this, even though protocol owned liquidity is introduced, its scale is completely dependent on the amount of synths that are minted on that chain. So like, Bitcoin Cash, let's say we don't want the protocol reserved to take a long position on Bitcoin Cash or Doge or whatever. At some point, if people start depositing single-sided and, the protocol starts getting a long position on those, the yield starts going down if the trading fees don't make up for the extra depth that's in the pool, because you're just splitting up that really small pie of trading fees between people that are just depositing single-sided Bitcoin Cash or Doge. So at some point it is sort of self-regulating, because
only if actors are rational, though. Like, what if you were the treasury of, I don't know, I'm not going to say, I'm not going to single out anyone, but what if you were a project that really wanted to get listed on THORChain, and you were like, you get listed and then you just like YOLO your entire treasury into an LP on THORChain. THORChain takes the Rune side in single-sided LP. So now you've basically just gotten like a bunch of free Rune to create a pair of, that's great. That's awesome for your project, right? Now your project has like a really deep pool. You can swap to native Bitcoin. You can use this as your bridge. Like, that's awesome. But like that, you've really just like transferred the risk of your project's whole bag onto THORChain. And I don't think that that's something that we should, or that we should allow, like, personally.
I mean, okay. If your concern is that, Dash or Cardano is going to, add $400 million or something like this or something, okay. I mean, that seems like a fairly far-fetched concept. But if you get to a place where there's a chain, call it Doge, for example, and the demand for Doge is high and people start minting synths because they want, yield in the asset, or because they want to do, orders in the order book, or, whatever the purpose might be, like, or arbitrage, whatever. And then you're saying to them like, well, no, we don't like you guys. You guys aren't cool. We think Doge is dumb or something like this, right? You're going to piss off one of the communities that are integrated with us. And rather than being at their backs and supporting them, which is the whole point of getting this network together, is to support the ecosystem as a whole, like the industry as a whole. You're now saying, okay, well, even though the community demands it because people are minting synths, like crazy or something like this, we don't like it. And so we're going to say, fuck off. And then you're going to get a bunch of tweets on thing about how THORChain hates Doge or whatever the chain might be. Like, it's just going to be a disaster if you ask me. The network, people should never be tweeting that THORChain hates Doge or THORChain hates Luna or whatever. Like, that should never be a thing that anybody ever fucking tweets ever, because we should be just completely agnostic, where it's an agnostic chain, agnostic to asset, agnostic to chain. We should be amoral. We should not have opinions about what is good and what is bad. The only thing we have to care about is the security of this network, right? And yes, you're right in the context of like, if the network's taking on a position to, Luna or something like this, then that's the thing that the network should be opinionated about, right? But not about like just general chains and assets and stuff. That would just be, antithetical to how this network was.
Terra was a quote unquote general chain until it wasn't anymore. I mean,
yeah, but that would have been voted on to pass. Like, Terra was the most in love fucking chain of the entire network until the whole thing collapsed. So if we left it up to the node operators to say, hey, vote, should we allow synths for Terra? Like, obviously that would have passed. Like, with flying colors, that would have fucking passed, right? Because at that time, it had like $100 million in liquidity in the pools. It had huge trading volume. And to tell them at that time that like, no, fuck off, like, that would have just pissed the fucking Terra community off like crazy, right?
Yeah. All right.
So that's protocol on liquidity. 195. Yeah, looking forward to it. But obviously it's probably, so it's going to need to bake in StageNet for a little bit. And even when it goes like live on mainnet, it's really used mostly in conjunction with the single-sided yield feature. So we still have to, wait for that to come out before we really see protocol and liquidity being used to scale synths, basically. So did you guys want to, so should we transition that conversation to talk about privacy? I know you guys wanted to have a little chat on that today. I got my popcorn ready.
Who wants to start?
Well, Tornado Cash dev was just arrested in Amsterdam last night, so that's brand new news that we can discuss on this space right here. Chad, what do you think about the Tornado Cash dev actually like I mean, he's arrested. He's arrested by Dutch authorities this morning, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's really early to tell because we don't really know the details, right? The claim at this time is that I think he was, he's like I think he was arrested in Denmark or something like this, and that he participated in money laundering and this kind of stuff. And it's not really clear whether like that just means because of the software he wrote was used for that purpose, or that he actually was personally involved with people, individuals, and like communications to like convince them to launder their money through Tornado Cash. Like that's not clear at this time, right? My assumption is that the latter didn't happen. That it's unlikely that the dev was actually involved in an actual money laundering procedure or a specific individual or something like this. And if that is the case, then how did he participate? He didn't know who the person was who was doing it. He wasn't actually involved in that process whatsoever. He didn't personally financially benefit from that money laundering process. It's like he's just as connected to that money laundering process as I am, or you are, or anybody else for that matter, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how this kind of like shakes out over the next like 6 months or plus to see as we get more details to it. It's fucking ludicrous and it's fucking dumb, and it makes no sense from any legal perspective that I know of it. Granted, I'm not a lawyer, but this has never happened in the history of America or any other country, to my knowledge, where somebody's arrested for writing software. Because generally speaking, software is considered to be freedom of speech. There isn't even a agency within America that actually regulates or like goes after people who write software. It doesn't even like there is no 3-letter kind of like agency within the United States of America that actually does that. It doesn't exist, right? If you're gonna like charge people with a crime, like writing software is not one of them. There is no fucking law that exists that writing software is.
People have been tried and convicted on export controls for giving cryptographies to foreign countries. Like, so there is. It's called the Department of Justice, and they can literally prosecute you for whatever they want under it won't hold up in court. I think we can all agree that this.
But that's participating in a particular attempt to like subdue the American government by giving like cryptography to like its enemies or something. Like that's really like that's in a cooperative manner. Here, just you're creating in a benign sense. You're creating software that has no particular.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I think we're all in agreement that like exercising freedom, being arrested for exercising freedom of speech with respect to writing code is absolute bullshit. I don't think that anyone in this space or beyond would doubt that. But yeah, it isn't. I think it's pointless to speculate because we don't actually know until whatever the indictment gets unsealed. So.
Yeah, and by the way, how people use your code you're not liable for such a thing. It's like if I buy a car from Ford and then I drive it into like a group of people, right, in like a city square or something like this, no one's going to arrest Henry Ford for such a thing. That's great. That's fucking stupid, right? So, I mean, if the day ever comes that some agency comes after myself or somebody else in the space for writing software, I will fucking fight that shit to the goddamn Supreme Court because that is fucking dumb. It would be a landmark case, and that would be one of the most important fights for like self-sovereignty and liberty that we've seen in this country for a very long period of time. And I'd be fucking happy to do that shit myself because that's that important.
Yeah, for sure, man. Yeah, one of the things though about the comparison that you're seeing on Twitter everywhere right now, where it's like, well, if they're going to go after this guy, why don't they go after Henry Ford, or why don't they go after Microsoft for producing computers? And I think that like the difference there, or the point that people are missing, is that like Ford Motor Companies was a massive American company that employed tens of thousands of people, and that carries with it a lot of political power. Right. Microsoft had a lot of political power. It's something that's benefiting the American economy. It's something they're paying a huge amount of taxes to the American government. Right. So it's like like you can't really make the comparison of like one lone wolf anon dev versus like the Ford Motor Company. Like even if the Ford Motor Company, and we've seen this with like banks, right? Like even if they break laws, no one will be held accountable because there's a political imbalance there. So when it comes to this kind of thing, it's like, yes, the standards may be applied unevenly, but what are you going to do about it? Like at the end of the day, political power is political power. So I would just remind us all to keep that in mind when we start saying like, where the conversation is it even something that we should be doing to cooperate with authorities, or should, as a project, we just like turn our nose up and say like, what we're doing goes beyond any country's borders and we're untouchable and blah, blah, blah. Like that's sort of the pervasive attitude in crypto. And I just don't think that you can do that. Like I don't think that that's going to be possible. So if we have not, I think this is like where where this leaves THORChain is like, okay, crap, there's a new war on crypto, whatever you want to call it. It's possible now that OFAC could sanction basically whoever they want and can shut down whatever crypto, or they can try to shut down whatever crypto project that they want. So that leaves us with the question of, like, basically, do you cooperate or do you just try? And I heard you mention yesterday, Chad, on the THORswap space that you think that that's kind of like a binary thing, right? Or you do or you don't.
Yes. Really it is. Either you cooperate or you don't. Because if you cooperate on one thing, you will have to cooperate on another thing, right? Like you can't just say, I will cooperate you on this thing and not cooperate on another thing. What is the result of that? Well, it's the same as if you said, I don't cooperate on anything, correct?
Yeah. So I think that's kind of where we're left now is, can THORChain, do you think THORChain can continue to exist if it takes that stance of not cooperating?
Yes, I will stand up and I will say yes to that question. It might need to make some changes. We'll hit some, roadblocks and have some struggles, and, maybe the network gets paused for a few weeks because of it. I don't know. But in any case and scenario, like, we can deal with it. If we have to run nodes through the fucking Tor network, if we have to, who knows? Like, if we have to transition to a proof of work network because that's much more decentralized, then we could probably figure that out as well, right? Like, there's many things we could do, but one thing I don't want to do is to continue to allow fucking governments to push us around as a people and to limit our access to basic financial instruments. That's the whole fucking point of this entire fucking industry. Got born on the concept of fucking self-sovereignty, freedom, and liberty. And that's the thing that I'm personally fighting for, right? That's the reason why I wanted to build fucking THORChain, is to contribute to this idea of self-sovereignty for the entire fucking human race. So if the government wants to come after myself or anybody else, then fucking have at it, and we'll have that fight. I will have that fight because it's worth fighting for. I'm not going to stand down just because fucking Joe Biden says some shit about, some ill-informed, moronic fucking statement of that, like, oh, Tornado Cash is used by some criminals. The fucking dollar's used by fucking criminals too. It's nonsensical. And so I'm not going to sit down because of that. It's fucking dumb. So, like, for me personally, that's my viewpoint. And obviously, I'm not THORChain in any way, stretch, or form. But my viewpoint is, like, we should continue to move forward. We should continue to fight for, like, ourselves and our sovereignty. And if we want to move into privacy tokens or other things, and people want to make it illegal and delete my goddamn GitHub account, I don't fucking care. Let's move forward.
So I do have a question that I'll pose to you guys. Do you think there's a difference between something that, like, I think everyone here kind of knows that Tornado Cash, everyone knows that's where you have a crypto heist, you hack a protocol or something like that. You go to wash your funds on Tornado Cash. People know that's like what it's for. Do you think there's a difference between something like adding Monero to THORChain and allowing swaps to a private currency and creating and like the service of Tornado Cash, which is like widely known in the lexicon as like a laundry service?
Yeah, but like, you can't make the assumption just because the protocol can be used in a particular purpose. And you can argue that that's what the purpose is for, but like, it's also just for people who just want their own personal privacy, which is okay. They didn't participate in any fucking hacks or exploits of funds. Want to have their privacy and remove the history from their transactions, and that's perfectly fine. Like, I don't have a problem with that, right? Like we shouldn't get into the place like I was saying yesterday on the thing. Like I have more reason to be pissed off about Tornado Cash than most people because our network was exploited, funds were stolen, and they were cleansed through that process, right? Which obviously I am pissed about because I don't want my network to be, fucked with. But I also acknowledge that the value that Tornado Cash has, or whether Tornado Cash or Zcash or Monero or any of these fucking services in the world, like they are all important to give people privacy. Like to me, privacy is something that is a fundamental right of humanity itself, not of government's rights, but of human rights. Just like the idea of like being able to procreate or the idea of having autonomy, right? Those things are rights that exist prior to government, prior to individuals and stuff. And that should not be fucked with just because governments don't like it. No. Privacy is a basic inalienable human right in my personal opinion. And so while I don't use Tornado Cash personally, but I would fight for the right for people to use it if they want to.
What about funds that are known to be stolen or like a known terrorist address or something? Like, could you ever see like a blacklist of sorts within THORChain?
Well, that's not my call to make, but my personal answer to that is no. I would never blacklist a particular address or any of these things, right? Just because like as soon as you get into that space, now you have censorship, right? And who determines who should and should not get censored? And
the people with the pointiest sticks, Chad. The people with the fucking guns.
Okay, Pluto. If your mentality is we're going to submit ourselves to the people with the pointy sticks and the guns, then you are in CFI and you should get the fuck out of DeFi, right? Because that is exactly what we're like. Is that CFI is controlled by the fucking sticks and the guns and this kind of shit. And we're trying to build a new system. I'm trying to build a new system where that's not the case, where it's actually just built on just strong economic models and empowers humanity to do what they want to do, right? And they can't fuck it up with pointy sticks and guns. That's what that's like the vision, the beauty, the utopian society that I'm like trying to fight for here.
We also brought up John from Shape. Thanks for calling in.
Hey, everyone. Yeah, just listening along. I agree with a lot of what Chad is saying, and definitely want to push back a little bit against this notion I just heard Brian got up that caused Chad to respond so strongly. That like, oh, well, Tornado Cash was just used. Everyone knew it was being used for laundering criminals. I mean, well, to some degree, there's truth that like, bad actors have used Tornado Cash. You can say the same thing for pretty much any public good or service or technology in existence, including cash itself. So we don't ban all sorts of things that criminals use. We don't ban iPhones because criminals use them. We don't ban pretty much anything under the sun just because criminals can use it. So to me, I don't really see a difference there with Tornado Cash. And there's a lot of people using Tornado Cash that just use it for perfectly good privacy reasons because they don't want everyone to see everything they're doing on chain for perfectly legit reasons, just because they value privacy. So I just really agree with Chad on that, privacy is a human right. This is something worth fighting for. This is one of the reasons, myself and a lot of other people got into crypto originally. And it's not surprising that governments are starting to push back on this front. What is surprising is some people in crypto being like, oh, well, it's just because they're bad actors, et cetera. Again, we can't create tools that anyone can use and expect bad actors can never use them. What we can do is hope that those tools create much more good for society than they do bad for bad people that might use them. But we can't just try to ban anything a bad person might use, or we'll ban everything.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the mentality that while some of these tools could be used for nefarious purposes, oftentimes that is a very, very, very small percentage, most of the time, in most cases, and that the value that these things provide far exceed the negatives of the cons that it can be hurtful in some criminal or illicit purpose. So like I gave the analogy yesterday on the Twitter Spaces about like bumblebees are a critical component of like just our natural ecosystem, and crops. Like we all of our crops would fucking die if we just got rid of all the bees. But yet, bees kill like thousands of people per year because people are allergic or whatever, right? And you don't say, let's fucking kill all the bees.
Yeah, I guess my whole thing is like I 100% agree with the objective of like dismantling inequitable power structures, but like it can't happen overnight, and you have to like read the room and realize that like you don't have two legs to stand on when 90% of the network is hosted on cloud providers that are controlled by the United States, right? So it's like choose your battles, but like also choose when to fight them, right? So that's all I'm advocating for is like, what is the risk of adding something like Monero right now? The risk of adding something like Monero right now is that now all of a sudden people are using THORChain to swap their dirty funds, and the trail ends at THORChain. Therefore, in the eyes of the public and the investigators and the authorities and everyone that has the power to shut us down, they say, oh, the trail stops at THORChain. This is a THORChain problem. Go look them up. Oh, they're all on AWS. Shut them down, right? So it's like, what is actually adding Monero do for us right now? Like how much volume is it actually going to generate? How much value is it going to bring to Rune holders? So I'm just saying, like, we need to be pragmatic about it. Yes, sure. If we're able, and we should constantly strive for and get to a place where we're decentralized. Maybe we could even go and spin up data centers in Abu Dhabi or some place like if a government decides that they are going to be open to this idea of DeFi and they want to become a haven for hosting DeFi infrastructure, then by all means, let's move all the nodes there. Let's get, but then there's still some risk of centralization, right? So it's just, it's like, I believe all the narratives, right? I came from CeFi. I'm here because I believe in it, but you're not just going to uproot the power structures that have been in place for hundreds of years overnight. It's a process, and you have to know what your actual grounds are to be able to do that. We're not in that position right now. So I'm just saying, like, we're just not in a place yet to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's the concern I brought up yesterday. So, I think the ideology that you're describing, Chad, is like why we're all here. Like literally everybody that's in the space right now is here because when you just like go on those rants, we all feel it, and that's what gets us really excited about this. But then at the same time, it's like, is it too much of a risk at this stage, right? Like the nodes didn't even vote on your that proposal that you were pushing for about like the 1/3 on any provider, for example. So like, how do we really rally the community? How do we rally the nodes to take these things more seriously and like get THORChain to a place where it would be able to withstand these attacks? Because I think the concern is that it wouldn't be able to withstand it right now. So I think we want it to get to that place where it could be like, where it could just say, fuck you, we're going to do whatever we want. It's decentralized. Nobody can control it, all of that. But the concern is it there today? And would nodes allow Monero to pass through, today? I would imagine probably a lot of nodes would probably leave. You'd probably see like a lot of restructuring and things like that, which is probably okay in the long term. But I think that's like the big concern. It's just like, what's the timing? What can we do to like get THORChain to a place where it is so resilient that it can just be unstoppable, right?
Yeah, but the only thing that's really not necessarily required, but I think I would like to see happen before that is just as backing, making sure all the TSS shares are backed up every week autonomously on chain. Like once we get that done, then if AWS shuts down half of our nodes or even 100% of our nodes, because both DigitalOcean and AWS and blah blah blah, whatever it is, then like we adjust. Like, we can't just wait for a time when the government's going to be okay with us, rebuilding everything, because they're always going to want to hold on to that fucking power. So like, I'm not doing it in their time. I'm doing it in our time when it actually makes sense, not just for us, but it makes sense of like, when do we want to have, these things, and do we want so much our self-sovereignty and our liberty and our freedom? When do we want wait until we feel that the government will allow us to have it, or do we want to fight for it now? And whatever battles come downstream, whatever happens, we adjust, come back, and we keep on fighting the fight. Like this, you're not going to get to the place we want to get to like with a meager attitude, right? You have to move and be strong and get things done. Like I'm a shipper. Like I want to move forward and ship and get things done and push forward and not, be political about it and ask for permission.
Yeah, I feel you. But like hypothetically, like these are made up numbers, but like, let's say there was like a 50% chance that integrating Monero today would like lead to so much retaliation that it would just kind of like set things back so far, it would basically kill it in a sense, versus like a year from now, what if there was a 5% chance that it would kill it because like nodes have decentralized so much further, et cetera, all these various things that could potentially happen. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, it's all, again, it's all a matter of choosing the battle and then choosing when to fight it. And this is also like kind of, why I'm pushing for like, when asked, okay, so what's next? What chains after AVAX? What comes next? Nothing. Nothing needs to come after AVAX, because every single chain that you add, you're moving us further from a goal of being able to decentralize further. I want everyone to be able to, run a Thor node from a small rack, the size of a wine fridge in their house, right? But like if the thing requires like global tier data centers, to even run, like you're just moving further and further away from that ability. So that was kind of like why I alluded to that earlier on in the call. Is like the more chains the more chains you add, the harder it's going to be to get us into that place to decentralize there. I mean, it's I don't know.
That's exactly what Bitcoin is doing, right? Bitcoin used to be very much more decentralized than it is today, because in the early days you could mine Bitcoin on your desktop computer in 2012. But now if you want to be participating in the network, you have to like spend like hundreds of fucking thousands of dollars and build an actual data center in the middle of fucking the Siberian fucking tundra to participate in the Bitcoin network. I mean, it's a good thing, and it's also a bad thing. More hash rate makes the network more secure, right? But yes, it also makes it more centralized, right? The Nakamoto coefficient for Bitcoin's at 4 right now, right? How many pools would need to collude to like affect Bitcoin? The answer is 4, right? But like, I don't know, man. Like for me, it's like I got into this space for this purpose, and I feel strongly about it, and that's just my opinion. And I don't own THORChain, I don't control it, and neither do you. And like the community will have to make a determine what it wants, right? And that's fine, right? I mean, we could even see like a fracturing of our community in the sense of like some people believe this way and some people believe that way, and maybe there's a fork that spins off that goes the other way, or whatever that direction might be. Like that's possible to happen, and that's not even necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I personally see it as just in terms of like what is the opportunity, right? Like personally, I think that less than 0.1% of the people on the planet actually financial privacy. But I think that like far more people are upset about the experience that they have with their their big bank on any given day, right? Like I have a fucking loan through a bank that doesn't even have a mobile app that I can make payments on. I mean, it's literally like garbage. And so, I think there are some people that fall within the like, we need to separate money and government, and some people just think, CeFi sucks and that there's a better way to facilitate transactions and commerce. So I think that you're going to find people along the spectrum, but just if I'm just looking at it from like a pure like cost benefit perspective, I would rather see us essentially becoming like the settlement layer for CBDCs, like, and essentially replacing a lot of the global FX infrastructure today, because I see that THORChain is the best way of doing digital asset settlement across chains. I know that the infrastructure that we are building today will probably be forked by whoever ends up building that settlement layer in the first place. So I would personally rather see us capturing the $6.6 trillion in daily FX volume, or even just a small portion of that via CBDCs, than fucking $1 or $2 million a day in Monero volume. Like I don't think that there's enough people that makes the opportunity big enough for it to be worth the squeeze, and certainly not worth living your fucking life on the run, thinking that you're going to get like your door broken down because someone somewhere thinks that you're helping facilitate child pornography or whatever. Like it's just it's yeah. I mean, I don't know. What are you guys' thoughts on CBDCs? Like, do you think, Chad, that they'll never be on THORChain?
Sorry, what was the question again?
Do you think CBDCs will never be on THORChain? Do you think it's a possibility?
Most likely they will never be on THORChain, just because governments will always want to control the entry and exit points of
they control the on-ramp and off-ramp, right? Like if you want to get a CBDC, you're going to have to, into or out of your fiat, you're going to have to essentially like have a bank, right? You're going to have to go through your bank to get it. But as long as like THORChain does not impede their ability to see where the movement of funds is going, right? Like essentially you get some CBDCs. Basically USDC today is already a CBDC. That's probably what's going to happen. Circle will probably get nationalized or whatever, or they will come to an agreement, quote unquote, where they're being, bought by a consortium led by JP Morgan and whatever, all the fucking, US banks. But like, as long as they can see, okay, this person took their CBDC, they traded it for Ethereum on THORChain, and now we know that the Ethereum address where it went to, like, THORChain is not obstructing their ability to have having eyes, right? And I don't think that the government really wants to prevent you from spending your CBDCs or prevent you from spending your money in most cases. But I do think they just want to be able to see things, right? And so for them, like where they freaked out the most with Tornado Cash was that they no longer had the ability to see it. They didn't know who was doing what. They couldn't follow the money, and following the money is their biggest tool in combating crime. So you prevent them from following the money, you're essentially you present an existential threat to their ability to do their job. I don't think that THORChain today does that. You can track the on-chain flow of funds across, from one address to the other. You can see, okay, tainted ETH went from here to here, they swapped it into there. Like, you can't really use THORChain today to obfuscate criminal activity. And so I'm saying, like, if I had to choose one or the other, if I had to choose adding CBDCs and keeping people, saying we're not going to ever bend to your cadence, but we're going to, we're basically not going to hide it. You can't hide anything using THORChain. I think that they'll be happy enough with that. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but personally, I would rather see CBDCs and a fucking $1 trillion in daily volume and $1,000 rune than fucking $0 rune after they kick down the door and fucking arrest half the core team. That's just my personal, like, it's just obvious to me that which one of those is better, but I might be in the minority there.
I think the problem that you run into there is that it becomes a degree of kind of like almost negotiating with terrorists. Not that, I think all governments are terrorists, quote unquote, but it's like the moment that you give them anything like that of like, okay, we're never going to add privacy assets to THORChain because we're too afraid of what they might do. What else might they be able to intimidate the THORChain community into doing? And what, where does that stop? I can think of a number of services that governments have gone after where the service was transparent, including the original Shapeshift, where we never obfuscated any funds. But that doesn't mean that was ever going to make them happy enough. So I would be careful with that assumption that you think, well, if we just give them this bone, then we'll be fine. There will always be another bone.
Yeah, I mean, that's why Diem never got a product off the ground, is because they went to financial regulators and asked for permission. And I think part of why we've been able to succeed so far is that we've been able to fly under the radar. So personally, the goal is like, let's try to fly under the radar as long as possible until we get to a point where there's enough people that have enough vested interest in seeing THORChain succeed. There's enough decentralization where they look at it and they say, well, like, in order to shut down THORChain, now we have to go to the government of Abu Dhabi and ask them for a favor. And it's like, well, we don't want to give them that political leverage over us because we already have, they already have so much leverage over us with oil, right? It's just like look at the world stage, look at where the opportunities are to essentially create leverage of parties between each other, and get in there and be smart about it. But I just this blanket, like, no, we're going to do whatever we want, and like, we'll never bend to anyone's will. It's just I don't think that that's going to work, and that's just my opinion.
I think ultimately we have to build systems that cannot bend to anyone's will. It's not even a question of will we or won't we. It's that you need a system that simply cannot. And if you have anything else, you're going to have problems.
But like, the backbone of the internet is built by like people that anyone can go take an IP address right now. Like, even if they went underground, right? Every node operator, and we ran it through Tor, they would just go start shutting down exit nodes, or they would just go, they would basically look up IP addresses and go shut down your server that you're running in your basement. Like, at some point, everywhere in the world falls under some government's jurisdiction. So at some point, some government allows you to do everything that you do in your life. And whether you like that or not, whether you admit that or not, like that's just the reality of the situation. So like you either find a government who's willing to let you run the software you want to run, or you go run it somewhere else, or you live your life on the run.
I'm not sure I agree with those premises. Like, I'm not even sure I agree that everything is always under government. I mean, I think the internet itself challenges that things that exist solely on the internet may or may not exist in a jurisdiction. I mean, does Ethereum exist in any jurisdiction? The actual, just the chain itself, I would argue it doesn't. Like individual nodes might, but as a whole, the protocol doesn't exist anywhere. And that's one of the beautiful things about things like Bitcoin and Ethereum. It only exists in a jurisdictionless place. So I would challenge that assumption. I think you need to build systems that cannot be controlled in that way. And I think THORChain's actually a lot farther down the road towards that than a lot of other protocols that are trying to achieve similar goals. So I don't think it's that hard for THORChain to be developed in such a way to be a system that cannot be coerced that way. And that's ultimately what needs to be built in my mind. The discussion we should be having here is not what things should we or should we not do with the protocol. It should be, how do we build THORChain in such a way to be maximally decentralized so it cannot be coerced? That's the only sustainable route.
Yeah, I think we want to have our kind of fundamental values as a community, as a project, and not have that be guided by what we think governments might do. I mean, I sincerely doubt we'll ever have a CBDC on any major country CBDC on THORChain, just because they're going to want to control everything. I mean, I know Bruce Fenton's in the audience right now. He's running for Senate in New Hampshire. I mean, if he wants to come up and give his viewpoint, I'd be interested to hear his perspective. But like, I agree with what John was saying. Like, you have to go for broke. There's no middle ground here. You know, either you're controlled by the government or you're not, right? And Bitcoin is one of those perfect, beautiful examples of one that just said, you know, we're going for broke, right? And it designed it and built it in a way that's very effective at doing that. And granted, we're not as decentralized as we would like to be, and we have to do more work. And I'm working for that. And you're working for that, Pluto, and other people in the community working towards that. But like, we have to do it, man. This is what the world needs.
If you guys don't mind, let's let some audience members request to come up and give their viewpoints. I already let Fimble up here. There's been a couple people who've kind of requested and dropped off. So if anyone would like to share their own thoughts, definitely hit the request button, and let's let some people up before we wrap up the space to get a well-rounded point of view. Hey, Fimble.
Hey, just a quick comment on all this, and then an unrelated question. But years ago, the whole cryptography movement was, under attack from the government, and ultimately, I think, cryptography kind of prevailed and is generally, accepted. So it'll be interesting to see with this tornado situation. I know it's going to take probably 5+ years, but it wouldn't totally surprise me if the government actually makes the right decision here and says, you know what, privacy is a fundamental right, and protocols like these should be allowed. But I also agree with what John was saying, where the protocols do have to be built to enable privacy, even in the face of adversity. So my question, though unrelated, was there was a little bit of discussion about the automatic backup of TSS shares after every churn. Just wondering if hopefully all the node operators are doing that, but if the government coordinated with AWS and DigitalOcean and the other cloud providers and basically said, hey, we want to shut this thing down in the split second after the churn, turn off all their nodes, would that kill THORChain if they did it so quickly that the node operators didn't even have time to back up their keys?
They wouldn't even need to kill it if they could literally seize all of the funds in THORChain if they wanted to, right? If you have access to 2/3 of the machines, meaning they went in, they basically like we assume that even a best case scenario in the event that someone wanted to fuck THORChain was that they would basically just shut off all the VMs and the instances would be gone, but it would still have their TSS key shares backed up, so we could reconstruct the vault, and then we could go and reconstitute the fund, spin up a new Genesis chain, and then resume from there. But there's also the possibility that they just say, no, we're actually going to go a step further and seize them, right? If you are able to actually get onto the machine that has the TSS key share there's nothing stopping you from reconstituting the vault yourself and taking all of it and seizing all of the funds.
To answer, Finn, to answer your question, the answer is no. If you were to shut off a split second before, no, because the funds aren't been migrated yet to the new addresses. So it wouldn't actually, the shares would be backed up before funds are even moved. So there's no split second scenario, just to answer your direct question. But I mean, Pluto's right in the theoretical potential of the government asked multiple cloud providers of multiple different jurisdictions and countries of different, all simultaneously to acquire the TSS shares and then confiscate hundreds of millions of dollars of people's, funds. If that were to happen, we'd be in a new realm. I mean, that would be like next level shit right there. And that would just, all it means is that we have to retool and we have to rebuild. That's all that really means. We have to do things in a different design. Maybe proof of work is the answer to that question. Possibly, maybe, right? Maybe it's not. I don't know. But this means we have to think of the problem differently.
Yeah. I just want to highlight, it's not multiple jurisdictions. It's literally just one jurisdiction, because every cloud providers is owned and operated in the United States. So just because you're running your node on an AWS server in fucking Taipei or in Sydney, Australia, does not mean that the U.S. government would not comply with the demand to shut down a VM that was located there. Literally, all it would take would be one court order saying seize all of the data on all of these VM instances, and AWS would say, yes, sure, here it is. Have fun.
Yeah, I don't know if that's actually true. I'm not a legal expert, or I have no real good context to this, to be honest with you personally. So I don't really know if that's actually true or not. But we have to move forward, and just do the best we can and adjust. And if that were to happen, that would be an entire new fucking. That would be one of the biggest news in the industry, and all of a sudden, everybody would have to be a THORChain's back and support of it, just because we're being attacked by governments.
I just wanted to jump into this conversation and say that kind of a couple things where I think fundamentally the community is aligned longer term. And I think, the real value prop of what THORChain brings and everything is the ability, the decentralized aspect of it. And that's where Bitcoin gets its value, is because it can't be shut down, and governments have tried to shut it down. And so longer term, if THORChain finds itself in that position and it passes that test, that it cannot be shut down, the value will just, it's astronomical there. And I think what we can do is do what the community's done in the past, where is define, before going to mainnet, we said, this is what we're going to do. And that's when we're going to declare mainnet. We could do the same thing with, for example, privacy chains, or, we could say, in order to be decentralized enough that we're ready to take on an irrational act or a government, this is what the network would have to look like. These are the PRs that are going to have to be passed. And at that point, we have instead of being reactive, instead of jumping into the fray being reactive, we can be a little bit more, have the plan and go in and be ready for the battle. I just kind of wanted to throw that into the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I think if this week's events should be a call to anything, it should just be that call to all protocols and all projects in the space about the importance of truly being decentralized. And again, I think THORChain's actually much farther along than other types of protocols that try to handle, any sort of cross-chain transactions and swaps. But that doesn't mean there's not more to be done, and we just shouldn't lose sight of how important that is. Because it's easy to lose sight of how important decentralization is until, in retrospect, it's clearly the most important thing you could have possibly done. So I don't think this is going to happen tomorrow or anything to THORChain, but we shouldn't wait and should just focus on how important that is and the things we can do, and whether that means finding ways to decentralize the nodes, out of just being in, things like AWS or cloud servers, and anything else we can do to make sure that the validators and all participants in the network are as decentralized as we can make it. That's ultimately what you want to do and focus on. And if you do that, then it will succeed and it won't be able to be coerced.
Hey, we also have G-Dude up here. Hey, G-Dude.
Hi, guys. Thanks for the platform. I've been involved in the project for quite a long time. So I kind of have seen how the narrative has changed. I remember in the beginning, everything was about full decentralization and getting narrow state as soon as possible, stuff like that. And I've noticed that now, especially in the community, people are more, it seems like they're more worried about the short-term consequences of these regulation issues, and even saying like, hey, we shouldn't even work on Monero anymore because it's like shooting ourselves in the foot. So my question is like, how is the team seeing this situation? Because I think that we could have a majority of the community that wouldn't support something which could arguably be better for the project long term, but then financial incentives wouldn't be aligned with that. So that's my question. Like, how does the team see the long term, and how do they reconcile that with the short term financial incentives of the community itself? Thanks.
I mean, I think what you're seeing in today's really good example with Pluto on the stage and him and I having discussions back and forth is that the concept of the team is being broadened and further broadened, and in the earlier stage it was me and a couple other people that really had the viewpoints and kind of dictated what was going to happen, blah, 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 and all these things. And I still have my viewpoints, of course. But I think as the team gets bigger and we've got Nine Realms is kind of playing a bigger role within the project, and there's more individuals involved with different backgrounds and perspectives, we're seeing of the team is being kind of diluted to some regard, right? And people are, there's much more, diversity, for sure, in the development side. But I mean, for me, like my viewpoint is unchanged, and it doesn't shift just because some person was arrested in Denmark or the OFAC kind of put an attack on Internet Cash. Like my Northern Star is about accomplishing something for the entire world that is needed to exist. And I'm not going to shake and just because OFAC flexed a muscle or something like this. I mean, I've always expected this to some level. I would have expected this to happen, or I wouldn't be surprised if it did happen. And like, it doesn't change my viewpoint or how I feel about it, because this idea has already been priced in years ago, right? So nothing has changed in my viewpoint.
Hey, thanks for that, Chad. I think you are the one that carries the most risk with this, obviously, because you have to dox yourself already. So I am, a lot of more people probably appreciate you fighting this head on. And I was thinking maybe we could work on some kind of education approaches to this problem, so that people are better informed in the benefits of thinking better long term and focusing on decentralization and not just some maybe speed or any price action that could result from regulatory attacks. So if there's something, by the way, that's being done regarding that, I will love to be involved. And I'm sure many other people, at least the way it seems from crypto Twitter, which could be deceiving, but it seems like a lot of people do care about the fundamentals and the philosophy behind what's being built, and not just price action. Thanks.
I think from my perspective, like there's nothing I'm ever going to advocate for that's going to be at odds with like the principle of decentralization. I wouldn't even be in favor of like adding any piece of code that like pulls from a blacklist and prevents transactions. Like I think that's pretty out of the question. I think what we can do is we can at least have some sort of policy, and we can build tools that help people that would be adversarial to us if we did not otherwise build those tools. Meaning, I would be in favor of building a tool that lets you pop in an address on any chain and be able to trace funds throughout THORChain to see where they were, right? So it's like, I want to be able to go to, if someone comes to us and say, like, what are you guys doing to prevent criminal activity? It's like, well, nothing, but like, there's nothing hidden in THORChain. So, use this tool and, figure out what went through THORChain. I don't really care. You can continue on with your investigation. I think if you at least have a positive attitude toward it, or at least like you don't act like adversarial, like you're not going to have a problem. So I think that there's definitely things that we can do. But I think that like not doing anything, or just like taking on this like attitude of like, we're just going to like do what we want is just not, it's not the right thing. But I think that there is a middle ground. And I think that lots of projects toe that carefully. I mean, look at Avalanche. What do you guys think Avalanche, or what do you guys think Solana are going to do if somebody tries to essentially do criminal activity on their platform. They're going to fucking straight up ban it, like using a multi-sig, because at the end of the day, the companies that run those centralized chains, they're beholden to laws. So, I just think that like on the spectrum, you're gonna see projects that are popular doing these types of things. And so I think just like for us not doing anything and like not having some sort of plan for like when they come knocking, that's what I don't want to see happen. I want to at least see that like we've done something. And what that ends up looking like, I have no idea, but there's a lot of smart people in this community, and I'm really excited to work with everyone to figure it out.
Yeah, I think John had a great point when he said this is the furthest along cross-chain protocol that in terms of decentralization, like there's really no one else that's even comes close to where we are, and we're having this frank discussion and just about privacy and whether that's the way that we want to go. But we're in a very good spot compared to 99% of the entire industry, especially in the cross-chain space. I think we're leaps and bounds ahead of anyone else in that. So I think that's a really great point to bring up. And I just want to thank you guys for the awesome discussion today about privacy and everything else we talked about. This is a fun space. Thanks, Pluto and Chad, for coming up, and thanks, John, for coming up as well.
One thing I would just push back on what Pluto said is that he said like he's not for the idea of blacklisting specific addresses, but maybe he is for not adding Monero, because of things or whatever. But to me, those two things, it's not even like a slippery slope. Those two things are the fucking same, right? Like if you refuse to blacklist, but then you'll go ahead and not add Monero, then like or do a blacklist and then not add Monero, or vice versa, whatever it is, like those two things are like the same thing to me, man. Like the governments can tell you what to do or it's not, and I don't really see a strong way of kind of threading that needle. It's either you're on the page or you're not, right? And I think in the long run, crypto will win. I mean, projects will fail, but crypto will win in general. And then, in the long run, that DeFi and this concept and what we're advocating for will be on the right side of history.
Yeah, I mean, in a decade of being, since I got into Bitcoin and being in the crypto industry and building in this industry, generally, I've just seen a pattern of the more governments push against any sort of centralized entity or service, the more decentralized projects pop up or proliferate, or there's just that more many of them. It's very much the Hydra theory of crypto and decentralization of like the government can clamp down on any one head, but I don't see a world where that doesn't just shoot up 3 or 4 more heads. And I personally think THORChain should embrace that philosophy. It was kind of what it was built, and it should find the ways to just keep maximally decentralizing itself. And if it does that, then things will be successful. As soon as you go down the slope of like, oh, we're not going to add this asset because it's risky that this government might not like it, or we're not going to do this, or we're going to add a blacklist, all of that, to Chad's point, all kinds of being the same thing. Ultimately, the protocol needs to build what is good for the protocol and what is good for the world, and can't worry about every particular government's determination, even big, scary ones like the U.S. government, in my opinion. If we're constantly worried about that, then things will not get built, and eventually someone will just fork THORChain anyway. I mean, I know that THORChain is fine with that, and that's great, but it will just mean that some other protocol gets built that is more decentralized. So the goal should just be build that maximally decentralized protocol, and things will fall into place. And otherwise, someone else is going to do it. I don't see a world where it doesn't happen. That's been the trend over the last 10 years.
So I have one last question for the three of you, or whoever wants to take it. What are these like biggest levers for more decentralization? Like what can the community and the nodes really push for right now? What do you think would like really move this in the right direction? I do agree. Like, I think THORChain in terms of decentralization, like has more of the ethos of Bitcoin than almost every other project out there. But I think there's a ways to go too. So like, what are the things that like there was like the 1/3 on AWS sort of thing, but do other things come to mind? Like what can the community and nodes really do right now?
Yeah, like that 1/3 thing, I was quite disappointed in, just because it's a great step towards decentralization, and it was pushed back on the nodes, which I thought was it
doesn't solve the problem though.
You decentralize it because more and more providers. That does improve the situation. Does it solve the situation? No, but it improves the situation. You can turn to like other decentralized infrastructure stuff, whether it be people's independent like bare metal, or even something like Akash for some set of the nodes. Like that also can help. the problem as well, right?
Most of Akash runs on AWS anyway. They're like when you get an IPv4 static IP address from an Akash they're literally just reselling you an AWS IP. Like
that depends on the provider. Like I think you can choose which provider you want to use, and you can choose one that's not on AWS. But like I'm not an Akash expert, and we can definitely have the space with one of the Akash guys and kind of hash out these questions, because it's good questions to raise and talk about.
Yeah, and we already spoke to them. Like their hardware, their product offering is not it's not enough to deal with THORChain. So just to answer the initial question, like what is one of the things that we can do to improve the decentralization of THORChain? Well, first we can reduce its footprint. It's an incredibly complex, incredibly expensive, and performance intensive thing to run right now. So the more that we can make it less so, the more we have a chance of being able to have, people who, operate, who operate a node from a sailboat using a Starlink or something, right?
That's not fair, just because the cost of the infrastructure is nothing relative to the cost of the bond. Saying that they're having a smaller, instead of spending $5,000 a month on infrastructure and you spend $3,000 a month, that's not going to push any needles in any direction, because you still need to buy $1 million worth of Rune to begin with to even get into the system to start. Right.
But the difference is between it being able to run in your house versus being able to run in like a modern data center. We should talk to Hildy, because they've done a lot of research around like running on bare metal and hardware, and there was a very real question when we added Terra. Like basically they were like, we can't even we'll no longer be able to run this bare metal node once Terra is added, right? So there is a very real point at which you cross the threshold of being able to run something on like consumer hardware and being able to run it like in a global scale GKE Kubernetes offering, like one offered by the major cloud providers. And the longer that we,
because he didn't have hardware at that time to handle a Terra node. There's commercially consumer grade hardware that can run not only a Terra node, but you can even buy nodes that can run fucking something as crazy as Solana. You can buy on System 76, for example, sells that kind of stuff. You can totally do it. I don't see any hindrance in this context.
Yeah. Well, I think that just the more chains that we add and the more complex that it becomes, the harder that becomes. So just knowing that that's a trade-off. But I mean, I would love to see more people doing locally hosted nodes. Maybe we'll spin one up and see what happens.
There's nothing stopping somebody from doing it. I mean, obviously it takes more technical expertise and knowledge to do that, locally versus doing it on AWS. And I remember back in the old days, I used to build infrastructure for a living. I worked for a company called Braycove, and we built our own data centers. I literally had to construct our entire data centers by hand, and obviously that's been completely replaced by AWS for obvious reasons. But you can do it. There's nothing stopping somebody from being able to do it. I mean, I could probably fucking do it myself, to be honest with you.
Yeah, but most of the node operators I don't think would be able to do that, just based on some of the troubleshooting questions that we've had sometimes. I would not call the node operators today the most technically fluent when it comes to building a data center, right? We can't expect every node operator to be able to build their own data center tier thing. So again, that's why I was just saying what's something that we could do to decentralize, find friendly jurisdictions and convince them to build data centers there that would harbor THORChain. I think that would.
The reason why node operators aren't necessarily the most technically, advanced individuals in terms of running Linux infrastructure is because most node operators are just early investors into the project, right?
Yeah.
And just made a good bet, effectively, made a good trade, effectively.
Yeah.
But I think what I would like to see into the future is that as THORChain becomes a critical infrastructure of the entire industry, and not just utilized by a bunch of cyberpunks, but part of the entire crypto ecosystem, is that you're going to see people like Coinbase and Binance just buying a node and running a node themselves, and because they're connected into it themselves, they want to be participating in that network, and so we'll get maybe even the Shapeshifts DAO, like John's on here, like it could be anything, right? Like I think as THORChain becomes what I believe it will be, which is this critical infrastructure, that it'll be adopted and used by so many large institutions that those institutions themselves will contribute and run nodes themselves.
Yeah, I agree.
I remember one idea that was being thrown around was like, could there be a way to shift incentives to bare metal node operators? I don't know how you'd get nodes to agree to that, but like kind of would be cool in theory, at least, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, you could do that in some ways. You have to think about how to game it and make sure it's not gameable in some sense. And maybe that's just by like for example, I can run on AWS, but I just run like a proxy node in my house, and so the IP address is going through my house, and so. But really, the infrastructure is not bare metal; it's actually AWS still, and so I've just like successfully gamed THORChain to increase my profits by 20% or whatever the number might be. But also at the same time, like you're getting compensated to secure the network, right? And so the pay should be relative to that,
Yeah.
I mean, there's a good question like, what is the next step for THORChain to decentralize, right? I mean, we can talk about adding more nodes, which is difficult because, it's got this 300,000 rune minimum, and not a lot of rune holders have that kind of cheese. But so going to 120 nodes, which is the current artificial limit on THORChain right now, it's just a hard coded number of 120. We're probably not going to hit 120 anytime soon, just because of the way the economics of running a node is. And so what do you do next? What's the next step? Well, we talked about passive nodes. There's a GitLab issue about the idea that you can run a node but not be a part of the active network. You're not committing blocks, but you're securing assets, and that can be done potentially with less hardware. Maybe still needs more investigation, but that's possible, right? Like, what would actually be the next step? And I think I'm not entirely sure, to be honest with you. I think we're doing very well so far. Like as John was saying, we're more decentralized by probably at least 10x than the closest project out there, which is probably something like AVAX Bitcoin Bridge or something like this, which has got 8 of 10 or something like this wordings. But I think we're doing very well, and we'll continue to push down this the path of decentralization. There's no going too far down that path probably, and we just gotta keep thinking.
Well said.
Sweet guys, great space today. Let's continue this conversation. I mean, this is always an ongoing conversation, but it's great to hear you guys speak, and I'm sure that the audience really appreciates this kind of transparency from both of you as well. So
cheers.
It's been really cool. Cheers.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks, guys. This was a great one. And even the debates, I mean, I think it's important to have those conversations, really hear the different sides, because it's not clear. I I agree with everything that was said on some level, so it's easy to see both sides. But yeah, got to keep these conversations going. But let's do it all again next week.
Later, guys.
Yep.
Later.